Bo Nix, one of the bigger stories in college football over the weekend. We've discussed those who are leaving for the NFL, those who transferred, and then in Bo Nix's case, he's coming back another year. James Crepea joins us, the Oregonian, covers Oregon for us, for everyone, but also with us on 365 Sports. James, thanks for your time as always. Was this a surprise that he's coming back, or was this expected?
No, well, depending on that's a matter of timing of when you ask that question. Was it a surprise a year ago? Was it a surprise 6 months ago? Was it a surprise 3 months ago? Yes. Was it a surprise 1 month ago? Not so much. And was it a surprise a week or two ago? No. Things really shifted as the year went on for Bo. Obviously, as his year, I mean, he had a career season at Oregon and had tremendous statistics. And if not for the ankle injury, and obviously the Heisman's kind of become a team award as much as an individual award, but be it as it may, was certainly in the running for potentially to be invited to New York, certainly for all conference contention. Didn't end up getting those things, in part because of the injury, in part because of losses. And that happens. But he had a career season. And on one hand, you say, well, in that case, then why don't you go pro? I mean, can it be any better? Like, why not go off that? But he's going to be an interesting test case. Him and, ironically, Michael Penix Jr. at Washington are both players who had career years off of injuries, both in the Pac-12 and the old Pac-12 North and at rival schools, where a strong case is going to be made. These are going to be two of the biggest test cases of this new era of college football, where two quarterbacks with tremendous seasons are coming back. And I think in part, you'd be foolish to not acknowledge that it's probably in part because they're going to earn more in NIL by coming back than if they entered the NFL draft and got drafted anywhere on day 3 of the NFL draft.
Do you think, I mean, did he get a draft advisory or whatever they call it? Did he get a report on himself?
He didn't this year because players at that age aren't even eligible to ask.
Okay.
Because Nix was being a fourth-year junior, and that you had the extra year due to the 2020 season. All those players, him and every other player at Oregon and everywhere across the country, just like a year ago, those super seniors who were, well, they ran out of eligibility, but the quote-unquote juniors of a year ago were automatically entered into the draft. Well, it's the same thing for the juniors this year. It's all over again. They're automatically in the draft. So they're not declared. If a player in that case has that free COVID year for colloquial purposes, if they say, oh, well, they're declaring for the draft. No, they're not declaring for the draft. They're already in the draft. It's the players who are turning back, like Nix, who are opting out of the draft to come back to school for their final year and utilize the additional year of eligibility. So he couldn't have asked for an evaluation in that perspective. That said, like, our scouts at practices, like they are everywhere, and I'm sure he got some feedback. Yeah. And I can say that, some folks around him, certainly were well aware. They're not foolish. They're well aware that this was not a quarterback who was going to get drafted in the first 3 rounds. And once you start talking rounds 4 through 7, the money's about the same. The guarantee is less the later you go, but the gross total, if you make it through, whether it's salary, bonus, what have you, is about the same. So, grand scheme of things, I say it could prove to be a more lucrative option for some of these guys to actually come back and play college football for an additional year. And I think you're going to start to see that in select cases across the country more and more.
Yeah, it's crazy how much of a game changer that has become potentially. It's going to be fascinating to watch how that sort of sorts out quarterbacks moving forward. You're absolutely right on that. There were obviously, I don't know how many people predicted a year ago when he transferred to Oregon that we'd be having this conversation right now where him coming back is massive news, but it is, and that's because of the terrific year that he had, put up crazy numbers. Oregon obviously had a great run, and now because of his return, they're going to be positioned as well as anybody you would think heading into the next year. How did he ingratiate himself along the way, and when did it start to kind of click how special this partnership could be for he and Oregon?
Well, it was clear early on that he had definitely put himself in position to win the job. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Look, go back a year ago, and when he committed to transfer to Oregon from Auburn, given that he was coming off the injury, given that he had obviously had a reputation and was pretty well established from his days at Auburn of, yes, some incredible backyard style plays and some big moments and big wins, including against Oregon, his first college game, but also those just mind-numbingly crazy mistakes. And you go, well, in that case, they're bringing in this transfer. And this is a fan base who is super jazzed about Ty Thompson, who is the highest ranked quarterback recruit from the high school ranks the program had ever had. And who's going to win the job? And are they just going to hand it to Bo? And is it going to be a real competition? Well, he showed up, kept a low profile really the whole way through, to be quite honest, even through the season, as low as it could be given, the level of performance he was having. But throughout spring practice, it became clear that, all right, this is a legitimate competition, but Bo's ahead. And then we got into fall camp and they're like, all right, let's just call this what it is. Yeah, he established himself quickly. He won over his teammates. And obviously with the performance on the field, that helps. And by the end of the season now, like you say, now it's huge news that he's coming back because of what he did on the field, how he carried himself. But, it's the things that, plenty of things behind the scenes, guys, but, especially the game like, all right, Washington, he gets hurt late, but coming back the next week to play against Utah and win that game, that meant a lot. It may not mean it in the grand scheme of things, but at the time, it meant a lot. This was still a team who was alive to make it to the Pac-12 championship, beating a Utah team who had flat out embarrassed Oregon twice last season. To come back on one foot and win that game against a team who later, obviously goes on to play for the Pac-12 championship and win it for the second straight year and is playing in the Rose Bowl. Yeah, at the time, it kept Oregon's season alive. It kept its opportunity alive to compete for a Pac-12 title. Obviously, they fell short of it. But those are the kinds of things that, when you talk about leadership and all those intangibles and those sorts of things that went over teammates, that's the things that Nix did throughout the course of the year, but especially through the course of the season.
How much did his return have anything to do with Dante Moore flipping to UCLA, or the two seemingly unrelated?
Well, you have to use a little bit of common sense combined with what you hear from Moore. And according to ESPN, and Moore spoke to them earlier today with his decommitment and flipped to UCLA this morning, Moore says that wasn't a factor. Now, having said that, he visited UCLA before Nix made this news, last night. Having said that, were there probably certain things that were, known behind the scenes or to a select group of people before what got out there publicly? Probably. You'd be a little naive to think, no, like basically, if you're saying from Dante Moore's perspective, what do you want him to say? Yeah, I didn't want to compete against somebody who is obviously going to be the starter again. That doesn't look great. Now he's going to UCLA where there's absolutely not a returning starter because DTR is moving on. Yes, they landed a commitment from I think it was a Kent State transfer or something, but be it as it may. So that guy, even if it is the case, Dante Moore is not going to say, oh yeah, no, I didn't want to go there because of that. I think you have to take it a little bit at face value in the idea of, yeah, he committed to an offensive coordinator in Kenny Dillingham who helped Bo Nix have a tremendous year, and he landed a head coaching job at Arizona State. You combine that with whatever UCLA was selling by way of Chip Kelly and all those things, and yes, the formality that was UCLA going to the Big Ten. And it's not just because, oh, well, Big Ten's better than Pac-12 or they aren't better than the Pac-12 in a given year. You're talking about a player from Detroit and going, and in all likelihood, we don't know exactly what the Big Ten schedule is going to look like the next couple of years, but we have a pretty good idea. Realistically, that could mean playing at Michigan and at Michigan State during the course of Dante Moore's career if he plays even 3 years at UCLA. It would be naive to suggest that had no impact at all. So I do think that UCLA changing conferences helped the cause. I do think that Oregon losing its offensive coordinator probably changed things. Again, that's just Moore saying it himself. But as far as whether or not the Knicks return played into it, Moore says it didn't. Anyone who's even remotely skeptical says, oh, come on. I mean, you got to be a little bit realistic there. But that's neither here nor there. Ultimately, in the short term, UCLA has a tremendous player who they're going to get for this season and for the next couple of years. And for Oregon's purposes, they've got a guy for one more year who they feel great about, but they will have to add to the quarterback room because right now they've only got Nix and Thompson. And whether it's out of the prep ranks, which is obviously going to be hard to pull off with 2 days to signing day, or out of the transfer portal, Oregon's going to have to add another quarterback. who absolutely is not going to be the starter.
James, what are the thoughts on Will Stein and the departure of Kenny Dillingham?
Well, I don't think it was a surprise to folks that Dillingham would be on the move potentially. Now, that said, it wasn't like he was dying to get out or looking for just about anything. No, the Arizona State job is legitimately his dream job, and it comes open, and how can you knock a guy for that kind of an opportunity when it comes knocking? So that in and of itself is not a surprise to folks. The addition of Will Stein, someone who obviously from a geographic standpoint and all that is someone who the Oregon fan base is starting to learn a little bit more about since he's been hired. But having said that, someone who, to me, makes a lot of sense from a scheme fit standpoint, has relationships with a couple of members of the staff, runs stylistically speaking, not the same scheme and offense, but similar to what Oregon was just running, and obviously had a tremendous amount of success at UTSA, both as a position coach and as coordinator this year. So when you put all that together, yeah, a young coach who's sometimes you get guys who they don't have to be established with resumes that are 10 and 15 and 20 years long in order to be a successful hire. I think Oregon made a hire who's probably one of the best young coordinators in college football potentially, and they might get him on the come up. And an opportunity to have a guy around for a minute, a younger coach who, yeah, they'd like to have around, as long as that success is rolling. And it helps, when you inherit good players, that helps. He walked into a situation like that at UTSA a little bit, obviously had a tremendous amount of success there and helped develop some players who made them really successful the past couple of years at the receiver position, at the quarterback position. Well, it helps Will Stein that he's inheriting one of the better quarterbacks returning in college football, and certainly in a Pac-12 that, quite frankly, is going to have a lot of returning quarterbacks who are pretty good. We're talking about Nix, but like I said, Penix or plenty of others. This league has a lot of really good quarterbacks coming back.
James, one more thing, and then appreciate your time on all things Bo Nix, et cetera, and everything else in between, is that the Pac-12 still does not have a TV deal. It appears as if that might be around the corner. We know what's changed since maybe the last time we spoke with you, or what's pretty much remained the same. If, in fact, the deal is not what Oregon wants, is there any chance that they would sign it with any kind of lengthy terms as far as grant of rights?
I don't think anyone in the league will define lengthy. Basically,
5 to 7 years. Let's say 5 or 6 years.
Well, 5 or 6 is not lengthy, really.
Well, with a lot
compared
of
to the last round, last round was with these dozen-plus year deals that became albatrosses at the end.
How about we say this up until what the other conferences are about to have theirs run out again because of the Big Ten and the Big 12, among others. So let's say 7 or 8 years.
I think if they kind of fall in the same general ballpark of timeline, that should be the expectation by way of whatever the Pac-12's deal ends up being. Pac-12, Pac-10, whatever we're calling this conference anymore. I think that's kind of the general art, that should be the idea. You'd be crazy to go any longer than that, quite frankly. You should be looking to time it somewhere in that general ballpark to coincide with the end of the other grant of rights for everybody else. So everyone's at the marketplace at basically the same time. And maybe being ahead of the curve compared to being behind it, relatively speaking, this time around, for one. Even though the Big 12 was supposed to be behind, but then they jumped ahead. Okay, so be it. And also coinciding with the timing of the playoff in terms of now we know it's expanding, but we don't know for how long. And I'm not saying it's not going to be a long time, but I'm saying but we don't know the length of the term after 2026. We don't know that yet. Is that going to be a 8-year deal, a 10-year deal, a 15-year deal? How long is it? I don't know. So knowing some of those things will help shape that conversation. But to your question, what if, Oregon doesn't like it? What do? Whether it be the length, agreeing to a shorter term, or is there going to be some out clause in there if somebody comes knocking or whatever? I can't speak to every which scenario. The bottom line is it does not fall on deaf ears around here to people who matter. That obviously this is one of the critical decisions in the trajectories of the institution and the athletic department and the football program. I mean, let's call it what it is. This is like an existential level situation, because if you get behind for too long, you've ceded ground that you will have a brutal time ever making up, ever. And I think the desire for lots of people is for this program to find itself in the Big Ten somehow. How? I don't know. I don't pretend to know at this point. I don't know if the Big Ten and Kevin Warren is going to look to expand beyond the 16 teams. Everything that has been said publicly is that they aren't. But having said that, would you believe them if they told you otherwise? I mean, do you really believe that they aren't going to look to do that if they can't? I don't know. But if the deal's not great, to your point, what happens? Do the corner schools then say, hey, if we're going to make basically the same thing as the Big 12 anyway, are we not better off just going there? You could probably make an argument. And if that happens, well, then what happens to the rest of whatever this conference is calling itself these days? That, I think, is the bigger question, more than just what happens to Oregon. Yes, I have to cover every day, no question. But I think the bigger domino would be, what if the deal that the Pac-12 gets, what if the proposals that they get is not all that much more lucrative than the Big 12, which is obviously on a little bit more certain and sure ground these days from a length of term and continuity standpoint. If that's the case, you could probably make a case for the corner schools to make a move, in which case then you've got 6 properties remaining in the Pac-10 who are open for the taking. And then what?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I don't pretend to know the answer to that question.
James, always great to have you on with everything you cover with Oregon. Thanks for your time. Oregonian. Oregon gets Bo Nix back. They did have the Dante Moore decision on him going to UCLA. And as he said, it depends on who you ask what Moore said to ESPN, maybe what he's saying to ESPN, whether that's true or not. Oregon's a good spot. A really good